So I guess what I'd like to do during the course of the next few minutes is try and distill some of the observations and lessons that I've learned as an academic principally. I mean, I'm a computer scientist, so I'm a scientist, so many of you will think, oh, it's something like this, and poor old Doc Brown with his mind-reading machine. Interestingly, some of my friends, one of our collaborators, are building just such a device at the moment, but we won't talk about that. In actual fact, I've been involved in academia in UCD since 1995, so I guess I'm fully institutionalized at this stage. But I've also had the good fortune to be involved in a number of startups, principally Changing Worlds and more recently Haystacks. It seemed strange when I was preparing this slide to talk about my academic involvement and my entrepreneurship type of things, almost as two different facets, because from my point of view, it's very much a continuum. And I really think that the modern academic is very different from the academic of yesteryear, or at least there's a lot of academics now who are focused much more on not just high quality basic research, but the application and even the commercialization of that research in the real world. The reason for that is that it's interesting and it's exciting and it's intellectually stimulating, and also because the funding agencies are rightly pushing us in that direction to make sure, as Richard and Paddy said, that we deliver a return on the very great investment that the Irish government has made in academic research. It's particularly important in these times because it's no longer just about keeping up. The pace of change is so rapid now that companies, to make an impact, really need to figure out how they're going to get ahead, not just keep up with the competition. And I think that academic research in particular has an important role to play in helping companies get ahead of the competition. Because often within research centres in the universities, we do have an opportunity to think more long term. And that's a very privileged position to be in, and it allows us to identify technology and potential solutions that the market will be ready for in 1 or 2 or 3 years' time rather than next week or next month. And of course, we live in such a dynamic and unpredictable and disruptive world. It's hard to believe that not much more than 5 years ago there was no Facebook. You know, and now you couldn't imagine a world without Facebook. And even the internet is not that old, and we couldn't imagine what the world must have been like before that. Digital cameras have completely transformed the photographic industry in only about the last 10 years or so, and now we have companies that are generations old closing down their film print business, for example. So every time that we think we've stabilized, some new disruptive innovation comes along and completely upturns everything that we thought was the way it was going to be. And I think what we need to think about is how we go about bridging the innovation gap, because it's not at all obvious, depending on where you sit or stand, how you get to the point where you can start to look ahead at where the next innovative technology is going to come from and how you can take advantage of that. And certainly within the universities, our main remit is high quality basic and applied research. We definitely have much less expertise at the commercialization end. And of course, the SMEs and the multinationals, their expertise is in product development and the execution of those products in the marketplace, the commercialization side of things. And there's a gap there. And the question is, how do we bridge that gap? And in fact, one of the great things that the Irish government has done is recognise that an investment in large-scale centres, these CSETs that Richard spoke about earlier, these are very good ways of bridging that gap at scale. So they're very good ways of bringing critical mass of researchers together with an ecosystem of industry partners so that we can start to bridge that gap. And of course, startups play a critical role in this because they're often the first to recognise and capitalise on an idea, bring it to the marketplace, and then work with larger multinationals potentially to scale that idea. So I'd like to talk about some of the benefits that I've observed as an academic working closely with companies and as an entrepreneur working closely with academics. All through my life, it's been about collaboration. In the various research groups that I've been involved in have mostly collaborated with researchers in other universities. I work extremely closely with friends and colleagues in DCU on a day-by-day basis. And the research would be very different if it wasn't for that type of collaboration, because within academia, collaborating with people from different areas allows you to think about problems in different ways. That effect is squared when you start to collaborate with industry and a wide, diverse variety of industry partners. One of the obvious things that people talk about in terms of access to academic research is intellectual property. That isn't it all about access to intellectual property? And I think there's such a rich vein of IP that is yet to be mined within the institutions, the third level institutions within Ireland. For the last 10 years, there's been a really step up in the amount of basic research investment. And that research investment has produced some very valuable technologies. In my experience, from a startup point of view, and in my experience working with companies, the universities take a very reasonable approach to the manner in which they license technology and IP. And by reasonable, I don't mean that they give it away for free, but I mean that they recognize the commercial reality. That in certain situations, that in all situations, you need to look for a model that allows you to extract fair and reasonable value for the intellectual property that has been developed by the state. But at the same time, you need to recognize some of the challenges that the industry partners need to overcome in order to deliver value within their own business for that IP. So for people who come to me saying, I couldn't possibly deal with a university because from an IP point of view, they just don't understand where I'm coming from. To a certain, that's certainly not true, but to a certain extent, nor does industry sometimes understand where the university comes from. And I'd encourage you to talk to the centres in the various universities in Trinity, Invent in DCU, and Nova in UCD to better understand how they treat IP, and you'll find that there are very reasonable and favourable terms available there. One of the areas that I think is lost often because people get blinded by IP is access to talent. I set up Haystacks recently as a young social search company, and getting access to the IP we needed was the easy part. Recruiting the right people was the hard part. In my experience, there must be effectively zero unemployment in the IT sector in Ireland, even through these tough times, because you can't get people for love nor money, and getting the right people and the top quality people is really difficult. One of the things that working with an academic institution or partner provides you with is privileged access to well-trained potential future employees. So, for example, in Changing Worlds, we were developing personalization technology for the mobile software sector. You didn't have graduates who were being trained up in recommender systems and personalization software. So it was very hard to recruit those, and as a company, Changing Worlds would ordinarily need to spend a lot of time training those individuals and those graduates. But of course, the connection back to the research group meant that the very people who were doing their PhDs in personalization and recommender systems were the very people who wanted to work for the new company that was exploiting that type of technology. And all of a sudden, a very small startup at the time had more PhDs than non-PhDs amongst its engineering base. All of them trained up as experts in personalization type technology. And we see that time and time again as we work with companies, small and large, within Clarity, for example. We see that as the students develop their research, they spend time with the companies on internships, for example. When they come to graduate, they will often go and join the company they worked with during their internship program, or work with the company that sponsored their research. So I think that's a much underestimated benefit. I think from a company perspective, when you think about working with an academic institution, don't be seduced by the promise of developing the next Google or extracting the next PageRank algorithm from academia. I think it's much more about identifying a genuine problem that you have in your business, often a roadmap gap, often a recognition that in 2 years' time we're going to need to get from A to B, and we actually don't know how to do that, and the market doesn't know how to do that. And we heard that this morning in the CNC talk, for example. And they had a very clear problem that they went to UCC with and developed a very credible and very successful solution. And that's what works most successfully in my experience, especially through the Innovation Partnership Programme. And I had the privilege of working with a company, Weedle, which is now Skill Pages, which is a really exciting new Irish startup, a few years old at this stage, but going from strength to strength. And they had a very clear idea of some of the challenges that they were going to be facing, not necessarily in day one or week one or month one, but probably more in year two. And they came to us and we talked about those challenges and how they fitted against the research that we were doing. And we developed an innovation partnership around that project, which is now coming to a close in the next few months, and which has seen technology transfer into that company. Code that we have developed is now being deployed within their code base. And that's worked very successfully because Skill Pages were very clear about what they needed and very collaborative in the manner that they approached that project. So staff that were working on that project funded by Enterprise Ireland were spending time not just in Clarity, but in the offices and Skill Pages. And it was an ongoing, rolling technology transfer approach that was being taken, rather than a deliver all your results at the end of the project. We find then that sometimes the larger companies don't, strangely, have a clear picture of what problems they want to solve, or maybe are more reluctant to share those problems with you, but engage with a view to what we call horizon scanning. So looking at more, I suppose, opportunities that are on the edge of what they're doing at the moment, perhaps wanting to break into new markets or explore new markets. And of course, academic institutions and research groups are very well equipped to do that. And what you find in the modern generation of research clusters and centres like Clarity is that you're bringing multidisciplinary experts together, and it's when those experts come together that you get some really interesting opportunities. And Paddy, for example, spoke about the work at DCU between the School of Computing Applications and the sports scientists and developing internet technology for reviewing training regimens. And that's an example of something that was actually quite straightforward to do, but wouldn't have happened except for the fact that we brought together sports scientists and computer scientists, and we work with coaching. You might say, and it seems sometimes that all the benefits are going one way, that it's all about industry extracting value from academia. And sometimes academics are a bit concerned about that. Say, well, what's in it for academia? And there is so much value in these sorts of relationships and collaborations for the academics and the scientists as well. And I think that the universities recognise that, and principal investigators are now starting to see that. In fact, one of the reasons that I set up Changing Worlds in the beginning was that it was difficult to evaluate the technology that we had developed in the lab, and we needed a way to figure out how do we get it into the market so we can get evaluation results to put into the scientific papers that we wanted to write. And so there are huge benefits to academia. There are opportunities that you wouldn't ordinarily see. You recognise new problems that you wouldn't see if you stayed within the lab. And working with your industry partners and people who are working at the coalface in these application domains are dealing with these problems every day and can bring them to you. And for example, we've seen instances where partners within Clarity have come together to develop entirely new relationships and projects as a result of the research centre. Access to these problems is critical. Our PhD students need a problem to work on, and that problem has to make sense and has to be well motivated and a genuine problem. The worst thing that can happen in many respects is developing a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. So more and more academics are recognising that they're actually not engaged in basic research. It's always applied research. That's where the really interesting stuff happens. But for applied research to work successfully, you have to get access to problems that exist, often in the marketplace. And the collaborations that we form with industry are often about, first of all, identifying these real-world problems, and secondly, about figuring out how to solve them. And hugely important to researchers is access to data. Nowadays in computer science, it's really difficult to complete your PhD if you don't have a way to evaluate the techniques that you're developing. And that often means data. And that's a really valuable source of information that industry partners can bring to an academic research group. So I wouldn't underestimate the value that you can bring to groups in respect to data that you may have available to you. And you always need to be careful depending on the provenance of this data, and privacy and security and all of that needs to be taken into account. But all of this is very manageable, and when done successfully leads to very good outcomes for both the academic partner and the industry partner. So let me just finish up by saying a quick word on Clarity and how we try to bring all of these things together within the Clarity Centre. It's been mentioned a couple of times. It's a Science Foundation Ireland funded research centre. We're a partnership between UCD and DCU and Tyndall down in Cork. We've about over 100 PhD researchers, so this isn't just a small group of people. These are very experienced, highly trained researchers, and very much a critical mass of them, with a diverse range of expertise. We have computer scientists working side by side with electronic engineers, sports scientists, material scientists and chemists, for example. And it's where all of those different interests come together that some really interesting things start to happen. To date, our main focus has been across the area of health and sports, and we have an open day in Crow Park in a couple of weeks' time, actually, where we're going to showcase all of our sports work. If you're interested in that, come and talk to me. We do a lot of work with sensors in the environment, and we do a lot of work with media and online sensors, for example. We have a very strong industry focus, and you'll see our demonstration stand at the back of the hall, and you'll learn a lot more about Clarity from that. But to give you an example of our industry focus, we actually have a dedicated person who's responsible for working with industry. A full-time person. Edward is here in the audience, and he'll be down at the back of the hall afterwards. And he's responsible for talking to industry partners, using a vocabulary that industries and academics will understand, and does a lot of work to help with the matchmaking. And this has improved the pipeline of projects that have been coming through Clarity no end. So we're very much open for business. You'll just get a sense of all of the various companies that we've been working with, sometimes on large projects, sometimes on innovation vouchers and much smaller scale projects, and sometimes they evolve into larger relationships. And we're open for business. There are lots of ways in which we can get collaborations up and running, thanks to the great support of Enterprise Ireland. We are more than happy to talk to you about innovative programs that we have, like our internship program as well, which involves us placing researchers in your company. And there's a very supportive and well-established IP framework which has been working well today. Thank you very much.